First, I am wearing two hats today, Balsall Heath Housing Co-op, for which I'm a volunteer, and the Confederation of Co-operative Housing that I do some work for. I do have other hats. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the project, not in any great technical detail, but Balsall Heath Housing Co-op as a cooperative is committed to our community values. We are part of the cooperative movement worldwide, and so responsibility for the environment is very important to us. And so we've had we were one of the first providers in Birmingham to install solar panels a few years ago. We've done some upgrade on insulation, but really when the opportunity for this project came along, we seized it with both hands, and we chose one of our oldest and least energy efficient properties. And one of the other real benefits from this is that it enables us to be part of a growing local low-carbon supply chain. I'd also like to take this opportunity to give my thanks to the contractors, to Jericho, New World Solar, Wattbox, Logmore, and particularly to Encraft, who have made this relatively painless for me as a volunteer. And particularly for the liaison that they've done with the Gardner family who live in the house to make it as easy as possible for them. So, you know, we're delighted with all of our contractors. I'm delighted with the end result, and I would have no hesitation in endorsing and recommending all of those contractors to you. What I want to talk about with my CCH hat on is a project called Greener Together. Now, Greener Together is a project that is run by the cooperative movement nationally that aims to change behaviour among members and customers of cooperatives. And it's run by these three organisations: Cooperatives UK, which represents retail and worker co-ops, Plunkett Foundation, which represents community shops, and the CCH, which represents housing co-ops. For those of you that don't know about housing co-ops, we are at the smaller end of the housing world. Balsall Heath Housing Co-op, for example, has 78 properties, and that is a world away from the big impersonal world of housing associations that are increasingly regional in structure and have, you know, tens of thousands of homes where people don't know each other. And housing co-ops are controlled by the people that live in them. Every member is everybody that lives in the homes is a shareholder and has a duty and a responsibility to the cooperative, and so all decisions are made by elected management committees or by general meetings. And you know, my co-op is no exception. And you know, the people that run it are volunteers. We do employ Birmingham Cooperative Housing Services as a managing agent, but the decisions are made by the people that live in the properties. Greener Together is a project that helps people to lead greener lifestyles by focuses on small actions that can be taken in daily life. It reduces CO2 emissions collectively and is funded by DEFRA's Greener Living Fund. A little bit about cooperatives. Cooperatives are quite in the news at the moment because of Lambeth Council. Co-ops are a particular and distinct type of social enterprise in the sense that we're autonomous and voluntary organisations. We are value-led organisations, and we're led by those 7 cooperative principles, which all cooperatives across the world are bound to follow. There are different types of cooperative. Consumer cooperatives, you'll all be familiar with the co-op shops. Worker cooperatives, there's one of those featured later in the presentation. Credit unions, agricultural cooperatives, and housing co-ops. Big society is on everybody's lips, and so people are starting to talk about social enterprise and cooperatives. We have to be careful. It is to be welcomed that people are talking about working cooperatively, but a cooperative is a distinct type of organisation that is autonomous and independent of the state and of government. In the United States, you've got a situation at the moment where private health providers are calling themselves cooperatives. They're not cooperatives. Lambeth is describing itself as a cooperative council with a question mark. It is to be welcomed that Lambeth Council is working cooperatively, but it is not a co-op. You cannot create a co-op by transferring state assets to people. And there is a parallel with Eastern Europe where you had state-run co-ops, where people were forced to be members of co-ops. And Lambeth isn't forcing people at gunpoint to be members of cooperative, but there is a difference between somebody being obliged to buy and be a member of a cooperative to a real cooperative where they are voluntary and autonomous organisations. Greening Together, there are 7 consumer co-ops that are part of Greening Together, and these are quite big organisations like Mid-Counties Co-op, which has tens of thousands of members and customers. There are 13 worker cooperatives, and there are 8 housing co-ops and similar organisations such as tenant management organisations. And there are 10 community shops. These are shops based in small villages, rural villages, where mainstream providers have pulled out of, and so the community has got together to organise a community shop. Each co-op has an eco-operator, and they lead the project. The eco-operator can be a volunteer or a worker. And so what happens with Greening Together is that the eco-operator goes among the members and customers of their cooperative and invites them to become part of the Greening Together pledging system. And so people are invited to take a pledge to reduce their emissions through behaviour change. This isn't about measures. If people install measures on their home, that's fine. We don't count it as an output to the project. What we count as an output to the project is behaviour change, such as adjusting the thermostat, wearing a jumper, walking instead of driving, and so on and so forth. And we'll come on to some of the pledges at the moment. This is my homepage on Greening Together, and it invites you to take a pledge in terms of energy, transport or waste. There is also a paper-based pledge system, and you choose 2 of those 3 areas. And so there's as many pledges as possible to choose from. And so these are some examples of pledges. I was doing the transport one, and as people will know, I cycle everywhere or take public transport, and I don't have a car. Therefore, this is quite difficult for me. So, I can't do some of these things. But these are some sample of pledges that you can take. And so there's a pledge for everyone. We also monitor whether people are doing it, so we send them follow-up emails to say, "Are you doing this?" And people don't usually lie in these situations. We have to trust them. And so today, just over 2,000 people have signed up. Most of these are members of co-ops, some of them or workers of the co-ops. Some of them are customers who come into the shops or whatever, and some are from the wider community. So where co-ops have held community events and they've got people who live nearby who've signed up. About 467 tonnes of CO2 have been saved, and that's just under half a tonne per participant. And I don't think that's bad at all, considering it's all through behaviour change. That's without measures. Also, 19 tonnes of waste have been diverted from landfill. These are some examples of co-ops that have performed particularly well. This is a co-op called Total Coverage. They are a web design sort of co-op based in Southampton. And as you can see, they're not eco-warriors, they're normal people. This is exactly what Greening Together is about. Which category did you put yourselves in there? No, sorry. And this is what Greening Together is about. It's about engaging people who aren't necessarily, environmental activists. 49 members of Total Coverage joined the project. They save 26 tonnes of CO2, which is just over half a tonne per person. Now, if you consider if you insulate your home, if you insulate your cavity walls, you'll save about 2/3 of a tonne, and that costs 250, 300 quid. They're saving nearly that much just through behaviour change measures, which cost nothing. This is Banner Housing Co-op in Nottingham. They had a Greening Together party. We encourage people to have social events because it is a collective action. Banner Housing Co-op is a small co-op with 4 members living in one big house. They actually recruited 6 people to the project, so they dragged in a couple of other people from outside, plus all their friends that came to the party, and they saved about half a tonne per person, and that's in a shared house. So they've reduced the carbon footprint of that house by about 2 tonnes. This is Argyle Street Housing Co-op in Cambridge. Again, they've saved about half a tonne per person. And this co-op is an example of the difficulties that housing co-ops face in the housing market nowadays. Argyle Street is another small co-op, it's about 50 properties. Their eco-operator, Bryony, left the co-op halfway through the project because she had a baby and her house is too small. The co-op can't provide any more houses for her because all of the funding goes to the larger housing providers. So it's quite difficult to sustain a community under those circumstances. People like Bryony, people like me, who get involved in housing co-ops, want to stay in them, but sometimes the co-op can't retain us because we just don't have the properties to do it and we can't get funding. That's a bit of a sub-story, but it just shows how difficult it is to sustain a community. This is the phone co-op who sell telephone services, and they saved about a third of a tonne per person. And this is particularly interesting. I mean, here again you can see that they don't look like eco-warriors. And that lady just there is Amanda, who is their eco-operator. And by her own admission, when she took on the role of eco-operator, she said she knew nothing about the subject whatsoever. What she is good at is engaging people and talking to people. And so even though she doesn't know what is the best type of wind turbine to have, or anything like that, she has successfully managed to engage people and to persuade people to get involved with those results. And again, that's exactly what we want to see. So when we started the project, we thought, behaviour change, that's important. It's one thing to retrofit housing, but you need to change people's behaviour as well. But during the course of the project, I think we realised how little we actually knew about environmental behaviour. And people talk about environmental behaviour without understanding what it means and without understanding what the triggers are. So what we've done is we've attempted to use Greener Together as a learning process, and in particular what we've started to do is to import knowledge from behavioural psychology as applied to other sectors, particularly the health sector. And so we've started to look at other initiatives that have attempted to influence behaviour and see what we can learn from them. Behaviour change, influencing behaviour, is quite a new science. In the past, it was assumed that the market would govern the way people acted. In the Second World War, the government realised that that wasn't enough and you had to influence people's behaviour. Hence, Careless Talk Costs Lives poster. After the war, the Archers was actually set up to give advice to people on growing food in an era of scarcity and rationing. It was advice in the form of a soap opera. In the environmental movement, we tend to assume that this acronym, attention, interest, desire, action, applies. So we assume that if we attract people's attention and try and stimulate their interest in doing stuff, then they will follow. And that's what most marketing does. If you work for a mobile phone company, your advertising is based on attracting people's attention, piquing their interest, and that will lead to them taking action by buying a mobile phone. We all know, all those of us that are involved in various initiatives know that it's actually hard work to get people to change their environmental behaviour. There was a piece of research done a few years ago that showed that most of the factors influencing environmental behaviour are not to do with knowledge or awareness. We often assume that if we raise awareness, people will take action. That isn't necessarily the case. The remaining factors stem from people's psychology, what goes on inside people's heads, and that's what we need to get a better understanding of. People remember the TV series Cracker with Robbie Coltrane. Cracker was a criminal psychologist. His job was to get inside the heads of people who commit crime and to work out what it was that got them to, what was going on in their head that made them commit murders and so on and so forth. The health service employs people whose job is to do with psychology and understanding why it is that people carry on binge drinking and smoking and doing things that are bad for them. They're looking at what goes on in people's heads that make them do that. There aren't people in the energy efficiency like him. There aren't people working for the utilities or for the Energy Saving Trust whose job it is to think about what goes on in people's heads. And that's what we've tried to do in Greener Together. And so these are some of the things we've learned. We've learned some long words to do with behavioural psychology, like judgment heuristics, which basically means that in conditions of uncertainty, people make intuitive decisions based on mental shortcuts. So, for example, most people, if they see a snake, will run. They don't stop and reflect about it. They have a mental rule of thumb which says that's dangerous and therefore I run away. Climate change creates conditions of uncertainty. Although the science is now widely accepted, there are still uncertainties about, is this the right technology for me? Will it work? Is it going to pay for itself? And so people make mental shortcuts to avoid doing it. So, for example, through the Green Streets project, I was given an energy monitor. And I took it home with my daughter, who's quite aware of climate change. My daughter said, "Won't we use more electricity than it saves?" And that is a common reaction to people. And because where we don't understand the psychological factors that lead to anti-environmental behaviour and what we can do about them, we sometimes lapse into moralism. And so people can think that somebody who refuses or doesn't take action on climate change is somehow some kind of climate change denier. But there is an enormous difference between the strategic denial of the oil lobby who have full-time people and fund organisations to strategically deny the science. There is a much wider layer of people who are in denial. They know what's going on, but they try to put it at the back of their mind. What we try to do is in Greener Together is to avoid moralism by giving people positive role models like the people you saw in the photos and replicable examples from people they trusted in their own community. One of the things that we've learned, a couple of years ago, the Cabinet Office commissioned a number of experts to look at what factors influence people's behaviour and how we could influence people's behaviour in a non-coercive way. And this panel of experts, which included medical people and environmental people and psychologists and experts from various fields, came up with this list of 9 factors that are grouped into this acronym called MindSpace. And for those of you that are writing it down, if you just Google MindSpace in capitals, you'll find it. The ones in green are the ones that are most relevant to Greener Together, but essentially I'll run through them very quickly. Messenger, we are heavily influenced by who communicates information. People tend to trust people from their own background, people that they know, people that have some kind of similar characteristics to them. There is a decline in trust in authority in politicians, multinationals, the royal family, and so on and so forth. Incentives, we respond to incentives by the mental shortcuts that I talked about. So I have a friend whose job is to sell loft insulation door to door, and the tactic that he uses is to present loft insulation as a way of avoiding loss. So he doesn't say to them, this is what you will gain by having it. He says, this is what you will lose if you don't have this done, because avoiding loss is a very strong motivating factor. Norms, social and personal norms. We are strongly influenced by what other people do. So, the sort of demonstration homes like the one that we've seen today, and also John's at the back, and the others that exist in Borsall Heath. People are far more likely to do something if they've seen somebody else do it. Default, we go with the flow of preset options. So if the credit card statement says this is the minimum amount you should pay, most people pay that, even though it's not necessarily the best thing to do in the long term. If eBay says to us, this is the suggested bid, most people will click on that. Salience, our attention is drawn to what is novel and what seems relevant to us. Priming, our acts are often influenced by subconscious cues. Affect, our emotional associations can powerfully shape our actions. Commitments, we seek to be consistent with our public promises and to reciprocate acts. Greener Together builds on this. It makes people accountable for their promises. So I could walk out of this room now and promise to myself that I'm going to do something. I'm going to install a water saving device. What Greener Together means is that before Christmas I pledged that I would install a water saving device in my toilet, and because I'd made that pledge public, I felt obliged to follow it, and so I did install the thing, even though it was hard work, because I'm not a plumber. ego, we act in ways that make us feel better about ourselves, and that's why Greening Together had community events, because it makes people feel good. DEFRA, a couple of years ago, came up with this model of environmental segmentation, when they said that in terms of environmental attitudes, not everybody is the same. People in the environmental movement tend to group people into two categories: the environmentalists and the rest of people, and people in the environmental movement tend to get frustrated that people don't respond. This model segments people according to their willingness to act and their ability to act, and it so divides people into these 7 sort of circles. So at our sort of event, you've got the positive Greens and the concerned consumers, and then you've got these other groups. And in Greening Together, we found this really useful. We developed our own segmentation survey, so we could plot which bit of the chart people found on. I haven't got the results to hand at the moment, but it's proved really useful for identifying where people are at. DEFRA's guidance on this talks about the type of messaging that you should use for each of those groups. It's a standard marketing thing. If you're selling mobile phones, you will have a segmentation analysis of where people are at. Another theory we came across is the idea of protagonists and perceivers. And the influence in behaviour revolves around the interaction of 2 personality types. So there are protagonists who are skilled friendship makers. They know a wide variety of people. They're persuasive. They're skilled at absorbing information. These are the kind of people that came forward to be co-operators. Some of those people are in this room. Perceivers are the majority of people. They're more likely to listen to the ideas of others. They hold on to fixed opinions for longer, and they can make an idea more powerful through zealously pursuing a brand or idea. And so, and these can overlap. So, when it comes to the environment, for example, I am a protagonist. I lead. When it comes to mobile phones, I am a perceiver. I don't. I go with the flow on that. And so, the relationship between protagonists and perceivers is the key one. And what Greening Together has succeeded in doing is empowering the protagonists, the co-operators, to engage with the perceivers, who are the majority. And co-ops are really good at this type of interaction, because in a co-op there is more interaction between the protagonists and the perceivers than in other organisations. But any civil society organisation, in any office or factory, there are protagonists and perceivers. It's a question of identifying who they are. We came across this theory called the diffusion of innovators theory, which shows that when new technologies are adopted, not everybody rushes to adopt them at once. Mobile phones, for example. When I first bought a mobile phone, I was the first person in my peer group to do so. I was an early adopter. Now I'm a laggard, because my children buy the latest mobile phone and I get it 2 or 3 years later. So this is what this looks like on a very poorly drawn graph. But you've got innovators at the beginning, the very first people to have something, then the majority, and then the laggards. And so this is something that I did with Transition Kings Heath. But this is a typical environmental curve at the moment. And so installing a condensing boiler is now mainstream. Growing some of your own food is now a mainstream activity. Installing cavity or loft insulation, we're now talking about late adopters, because certainly in Birmingham most of the easy lofts and cavities have been insulated, and we're now down to the people who can't or won't do it. Whereas the more innovative things like permaculture food growing, photovoltaics, we're talking about early adopters. And that's quite important for understanding who our audience is. So, because I've gone on for far too long, Greening Together is about leaving a legacy towards the cooperative movement, but also that other organisations can follow. And when we think about the rollout of Green Deal and so on and so forth. So within the cooperative movement, there is now a layer of green leaders who are taking forward a whole number of projects and realising the potential of the cooperative movement to be at the heart of the low carbon economy. And so that will stay beyond the Greening Together project. This will inform the future cooperative movement in terms of retrofit in housing co-ops, large-scale renewable energy projects led by the consumer cooperatives who now own wind farms. You've seen the cooperative adverts on the telly. and also behaviour change programmes. A significant, and this is what we've learned that is of general use, that significant additional CO2 savings can be achieved through behaviour alone. And so as part of a retrofit programme, that is actually quite important. A level of hand-holding or nudging is required, but other projects such as the Birmingham Green Doctor show that that is actually quite a cost-effective way of doing things. Behavioural advice should be part of any Green Deal retrofit programme. Trusted messengers in existing social networks are key to changing environmental behaviour. That should be obvious, but I think we've demonstrated it. And this is replicable in any community of place or any community of interest, not just co-ops. In any neighbourhood, in any place of worship, in any office or factory, in any online community, there are people who are trusted messengers who can persuade other people to do it, and those people are the key. So our 7 cooperative principles that we use in the cooperative movement actually, while they're the sort of copyright of the cooperative movement, if you want to put it that way, should underpin a community-led approach to the low carbon revolution, because they're all relevant to that. And that's me finished, so thank you.